A video last night, live streaming. The people that watch me a lot know that someone named I'm Really Important, a person that does debates and things like that, political commentary on Twitch, decided that he was going to talk to me. And he wanted to talk to me about a video that I'd done and an article that I'd wrote about biolabs in Ukraine. And it got to talking about the Ukraine situation, and then he left, and I was talking to people in the audience, and there's this idea of you have to accept everything that the State Department says or the intel community says, or you're on the side of Putin, or you're spreading Putin disinformation. And this is a childish way to look at things. It's just a stupid way to look at the world. It's the same people that would have been saying, if you question the story of WMDs in Iraq or in the first Iraq invasion, if you question the babies in incubators story, that you were peddling Saddam disinformation and you were pro-Saddam. It's stupid. It's a way to silence people, to shame people, and it's a way to get out of having a serious investigation and serious questions about things that are going on with our foreign policy. And there's reason to question because we've constantly seen that the people managing our foreign policy are corrupt, are unethical, are incompetent. Just look at the situation in Afghanistan. If it wasn't for people asking questions in social media, does anyone truly believe that we would have found out that when Biden's administration celebrating, we got him, we got the guy from ISIS-K that killed our troops, we got the top ISIS-K leader in the area? Is there any doubt that that's still what the narrative would be today? But instead, people that were unwilling to just parrot that were like, well, wait a minute, what's going on? And then we found out we didn't get the leader of ISIS-K. Who we got was an ally of the United States and his children. That's who we killed. So this idea of, well, you're either with us or against us, you have to parrot everything we say, or if you say anything that's critical of the United States or NATO or our allies, then that must mean that you want Putin to win or you want our enemies to win. It's stupid. It's nonsense. But as the conversation was going, and I was talking to some people in the chat, people started to say that, well, you know, there are people that seem to be pro-Putin. One of the people that came up was Tucker Carlson. And the claim was that Tucker Carlson has said that actually the people to blame for the invasion, Putin's invasion, is the United States and NATO, not Putin. Putin's not to blame. And I said, I don't believe that's the case. I can't claim to see everything Tucker Carlson did. Probably watched 30% of his shows. And usually I don't even watch the whole show. But it seemed to me that Tucker's stance was similar to Ron Paul's stance. And that stance was something like this. Ron Paul had a stance after 9/11 and things like that that said, of course you blame the hijackers, of course you blame you blame Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. However, you also have to look as what has the United States done that could have exacerbated this situation or helped lead to it. For example, if we indiscriminately drop bombs on a country in the Middle East, every person you killed is someone's son or daughter or husband or wife or mother or father, and you probably just radicalized the rest of the people in that family. And so therefore you're creating more radical people that hate you than you're actually dealing with. Now, to me, this isn't an argument for complete pacifism or anything like this, but it's how a responsible adult would look at things and say, this is why we have to be very certain that we're targeting and taking life in militaristic ways as small as possible, as detailed as possible, to make sure that we're not creating more problems than we're causing. And sadly, we can see through corruption and other things that the people running the United States foreign policy and military industrial complex and intel agencies have actually caused far more problems than they've solved, at least in my lifetime. So I felt that Tucker Carlson was making an argument. I can't speak for Tucker, but that's certainly what I believe. I believe that Putin's absolutely to blame. I don't like these foreign regime change wars or these interventions. I don't like it. I don't like it when the United States did it in Iraq, and I don't like it when Putin's doing it in Afghanistan. But that doesn't mean that we can't look and say, did the United States or NATO do things that helped exacerbate the situation? And by being honest and having conversations about, well, was it risky to encircle Russia with NATO? Was it risky to basically have a color revolution in Ukraine in 2014, where Victoria Nuland admitted to basically the United States installing the President Poroshenko? Was it risky to bomb Syria, who is a neighbor and ally of Vladimir Putin? Those are all reasonable questions to ask. And to say that you can't ask those questions or it must be you're on the side of Putin is nonsense. But none of that's really what I want to talk about right now. One of the quotes that was brought up by people that were saying, well, we have proof, or this is the quote that might suggest that Tucker Carlson was pro-Putin, was something that went like as follows. This isn't verbatim, but just off my memory. Tucker Carlson apparently was quoted as saying, what has Putin done to you, Mr. Average American? Has he called you racist? Has he told you that you can't go to work? Has he told you that you have to be locked down? Has he told you that you're a Nazi? Has he shut down your business? And people said, see, this proves that he's pro-Putin. He's saying Putin's not a bad guy. And this caused me to go on a little rant. And I've thought about it, and I have a lot to say on this point. Because this is something that you see being said. Not that specifically about Tucker Carlson, but the crux of it is this. You, average American, have to be incensed at Vladimir Putin and find that the situation in Ukraine is the most important thing in the world right now. And that, to me, is a step too far. It is outrageous. So a little about me. I live in rural Pennsylvania. I've lived in the same 20-mile radius my entire life. I went to university. I met people in the debate community. I debated in college that were some of the most left-wing people. Many of those people are my friends today. But most of the people where I live would be non-political or right-wing. Most of them are blue-collar workers. Almost none of them are wealthy. Almost everyone I know lives paycheck to paycheck. That's who they are. Those are the people that I respect most in the world. I'm not saying that there aren't other groups of people to respect. Absolutely. And to each their own. But these are a group of people that I don't see anyone sticking up for. No one in our culture, no one in our political class. There's all sorts of struggles that's going on in flyover country, in rural America. Yet, unlike other communities like inner cities that are having problems, no one seems to give a shit what's going on in rural America. They're told that they have privilege or that their problems are their fault. They have almost no representation politically with people with power. The people that they vote for over and over, by the way, usually Republicans, don't seem to do shit to help people in these areas. These people help make this country great in what it is, and yet their labor's been outsourced over and over to countries around the world. So the politicians that continue to help outsource that got wealthy, and countries around the world and corporations around the world got wealthy off the back of these American workers. And yet they're treated like pariahs. They're treated like people that the elites just say, just go away. We don't actively want to destroy you or anything, though in some cases that might be the case. But we just want you to go away. Stop talking. You're a relic. You're an antique. Shut up. We don't need you anymore. Used to be a coal miner? Learn to code. That's the mentality of so many people in positions of power. But it's not just politically. It's also true culturally. Show me the entertainer. Show me the late night comedian that's giving the perspective of rural America. Show me the people that are sticking up for them. Show me the people in academia that are focusing heavily on the problems that occur in rural America. Show me the people in Silicon Valley. Show me the people in corporate America. That's not to say that the problems that occur in my community or in other communities in rural America are the absolute worst problems that are occurring in this country. I don't know that. I know that almost any community, even ones that we consider wealthy, could have significant problems, and it's worth addressing the unique problems that all communities could have. It's not a competition. And yet we take problems seriously in most other communities. Sometimes that's of little value in that even if we take them seriously or we pretend to take them seriously, those problems don't get solved. But there is something to be said of, at least people sympathize with you if you're from certain communities and there's problems happening. That's not what really happens in rural America, at least not from the people that are in positions of power in our political system and our cultural system. What they think is, we don't really care about these people in rural America. They kind of are getting what they deserve. Just be quiet. And so life's been tough in a lot of places in rural America, including where I'm at in rural Pennsylvania. And it's been getting tougher for decades now, almost my entire life. I'm 37 years old. That's not to say that people are all depressed or miserable, but you see things like opioid abuse, drug abuse, alcoholism, depression, all on the increase. Home ownership decreasing, suicides increasing. It's been occurring for a while. Then comes COVID. I live in Pennsylvania. I watched people around me for the first time that used to hear me talk about politics a lot and say, whatever, we don't want to hear you talk about politics. All of a sudden they were concerned. I can't go to work. My mom's in a nursing home. I can't go visit her. My daughter can't go to school. I don't know how I'm going to pay the mortgage this month. I watch this happen again and again. People that normally said, politics, that's not for me. Most people don't give a shit around here. And it's probably true of most people around the country. They just kind of want to be left alone, have their hobbies, their families, their job. But now politics was butting its way into their lives. And so like most things, we were asked to sacrifice. That's what our governor, Tom Wolf, said. We needed to sacrifice. He said, if you had a problem with the lockdowns and things like that, you were a coward, is what he said. You were a coward in the face of COVID. And if your county leaders decided to not enforce lockdowns and things like that, he would take away their CARES Act funding. And if you as an individual did that, he may consider taking away your license to operate a business. That's what Tom Wolf said. And then 2 weeks after that, Tom Wolf violated his own lockdown by going to march with Black Lives Matter. And I watched business owners and people that couldn't go to work appalled by this. Are you kidding me? And Tom Wolf was like, yeah, I did it. He was basically unapologetic. He said, maybe I should have thought more about it. But I didn't care. And that double standard occurred over and over and over for over 2 years in this country. Not because of COVID, but because of our reactions to COVID. You couldn't go to church. You couldn't go to the hair salon. You couldn't go to work. You couldn't go visit your family. You couldn't have a funeral for your loved one that died. But the politicians could. The celebrities could. The people that virtue signaled the right thing, they could do whatever they wanted. But not you. You were a bad person. If you wanted to go to a political gathering, you were bad and in a super spreader event. If they wanted to go to a political gathering, absolutely, COVID's bad, but racism's worse. That's what we were told. And although this was hypocrisy and double standard and control was pointed out, most people didn't really have a voice where I live. Most people in rural America basically went unheard. And so sacrifice they did. Small businesses collapsed. People had to downsize. Many people had to sell their house and start renting. People had to quit jobs, even after the lockdown. There were trailer factories around here, which is the biggest labor source in the area. Most families, because of disastrous policies that we've had for decades in this country, now need to have both the mother and father working. So how could both mom and dad work if schools are closed and the kid can't go to school now? You planned your life and your career over the fact that you knew that from the hours of 8 to 3:30, your kid was going to be in school. But now all of a sudden you had to be there for your kid. What do? So you can't show up to the factory. But the problem is if enough people can't show up to the factory, then the other people in the factory can't do their job. People that hauled houses out of these companies that are oversized load, like my father-in-law, they had difficulty finding people that would be escort drivers for them. Because many of them said, I'll just take the government money and stay home. And so the dealerships that were buying the house and setting the house was having trouble finding people to bring them. The truck drivers were having trouble finding enough truck drivers to do it. If they did do it, they were having trouble finding escort drivers to do it. The factory themselves was having trouble being able to build as many houses as there was demand. So demand was falling because people were struggling financially all over the place. And none of this had to do with COVID itself. It had to do with the reaction to it. But people sacrificed. They did. There's a person from, I think he's from One American News Network. His name's Jesse Kelly. Maybe you're listening to me and you don't like Jesse Kelly, and that's fine. Jesse Kelly did a Twitter thread one day, and he said, I'm going to be doing my show tomorrow. And in my show, I'm going to talk about bad shit that's happened to people over COVID. Do you have stories for me? And And people started to write stories on this thread, which then convinced me to listen to this radio show. And it was, as an American, some of the most heartbreaking things I've ever heard. Here are some of the stories that people told. My mom had dementia. We put her in a nursing home, but we visited diligently every day. Then we were told we couldn't go. My mom was scared. She could barely operate a phone, but she tried to call every day. She didn't know where her family was. So she died alone, and then we couldn't have a funeral. Or, my daughter has spina bifida. She has to breathe very heavily when she walks. When she goes to school, she's forced to wear a mask, and so she can't breathe. So now she can't go to school. And her development in being able to walk has declined. Now she's depressed. And that's not to speak of the people that told stories about, I worked my whole life to have this business. Now it's collapsed. It's completely done. And no one gives a shit about these people. You couldn't see your mom in Pennsylvania if she was in the nursing home. So she died alone. Then you couldn't really have a funeral that she deserved. But you turned on TV and you saw John Lewis, didn't you? You saw the funeral he was having. Hundreds of people there. People that are better than you. Little things that we don't think about, like just having fun in life, having entertainment. You couldn't go to a ball game. You couldn't go to a movie theater. You couldn't go to a concert. You couldn't even go to the hair salon. But Lori Lightfoot could. Gavin Newsom could. When they talked about needing to sacrifice, they didn't mean themselves. They meant average people, particularly the working class and the poor. That's what they meant. Stephen Colbert said the other day, it's worth paying a couple bucks more a gallon for gas, as long as you could have a clean conscience. He said, I'd be willing to pay 15 bucks a gallon. I drive a Tesla. I don't drive a Tesla, Stephen Colbert, and neither is anyone I know. If I had to guess, I would say that most of the people I know in my community drive cars that are on average 10 years old. Most of the people in my family and people that I consider close friends, they drive cars older than that. They can't really afford a new vehicle. I don't know what that's like. I'll probably never be able to afford a brand new vehicle. But I'm glad that life's been kind to you, Stephen Colbert, and I'm glad that you could afford it. But maybe before you spout nonsense like that off, understand that there are people that $1 a gallon will mean the difference between being able to continue to pay the mortgage or not. It'll mean the difference between being able to keep the lights on for your kid or not, or buy groceries for your family. That's what it'll mean to them. But I'm glad you have a moral conscience, that you could feel good about your virtue signaling about Ukraine. That's fantastic. So for 2 years, this happened under COVID. Not only were people treated like that they were cowards and they were horrible if they didn't go along with every sacrifice that was only a meaningful sacrifice to them, not to the elites. They could afford to pay more. They could afford to not have to go out and hang out with friends at concerts and things like that. When you're that wealthy, you have entertainment options yourself at home and things of that nature. And you could just break the rules if you have enough money and power anyways. You couldn't go do things, but Barack Obama could have a nice birthday party, couldn't he? With all of his cool, sophisticated friends. So people were pissed. Rightfully so. I'm pissed. And I'm lucky. I might not make a lot of money, but I have the greatest family in the world. And I have a job where I have the ability to just work more hours if I want. So that's what I did. But many people I know don't have that option. Maybe they have a job that's only 40 hours a week and they can't have overtime. Maybe they're older and they can't work crazy hours like that anymore. And for those people, the sacrifice was real to them. But not only were they told to sacrifice, they were told that they couldn't question it. They couldn't point out the hypocrisy. They couldn't say, are these things really worth it? They'd be censored off social media. They were told that the pandemic was their fault. They made the meaningful sacrifices, and still everything was their fault. Truckers that are coming together to say we've had it with the sacrifices that were being made, they must be terrorists. They must be Nazis. We should freeze their bank accounts. That's what the elite said. And now finally, when many of the things that people said about these restrictions failing, or the things we were being told about COVID and the reaction to it being necessary, when many of it now comes out that actually the people that were being censored were right about a lot of the stuff they were saying. And it seems that things like the lockdowns were a terrible idea. And it seems that masking children was a terrible idea. And it seems that forcing children not to go to school was a terrible idea. And it seems that firing people with natural immunity was a terrible idea. But these are all things that you could be censored for saying. Oh well, just move forward. Now's not the time to look backwards. Trust the science has changed. So after 2 years of that indignity and that struggling, suicide rates going up, fentanyl overdoses being the number one cause of death for young men in this country, rural America having horrible opioid crisis that's getting even worse, home ownership declining, cost of living going through the roof. Even with all of that, it seems like maybe we're rounding a corner with COVID. Thank goodness the midterms are coming up, and now COVID magically has been cured. But maybe a sigh of relief. Well, whatever. At least maybe we can start to get back to normal a little. Most people were back to normal in my area. It's just they were struggling financially. But they stopped pretending that the rules that they were told they had to enforce, like mask mandates and not sending your children to school and forcing your child to wear a mask, they started to realize that was bullshit. In fact, far earlier than people would imagine. But they were still harmed financially. So it's in that context that I have to listen to people come on my channel, in my chat, and say, well, you have to be concerned about Ukraine. You have to understand that it's the most important thing in the world right now. You have to make sacrifices. If you want to have a clean conscience, you need to be willing to make sacrifices for the people of Ukraine. Let me say a word about the people of Ukraine. I feel horrible for them. And I don't just feel horrible for them for this current situation. I know what it's like to feel that I don't have elected leaders and people in positions of my power, or in my country, that really identify with my principles and my way of life. Imagine living in Ukraine. Heck, even the official narrative is what? Yanukovych, a president in Ukraine, was a pro-Russian stooge. He may very well have been. So then instead, in 2014, the United States helps install Poroshenko, who's basically a pro-United States stooge. I'm sure the average person in Ukraine just wants leaders that care about the average people of Ukraine, as opposed to what can we do for our masters in Russia, or what can we do for our masters in DC. I don't want them to die. I don't want them to be invaded. I don't want Russians to die. I feel terrible about it. But you know who else I feel terrible for? People in Yemen that our ally Saudi Arabia is bombing. I feel bad for them. I feel bad for the people in Afghanistan that the United States engaged in a 20-year war that we were lied to over and over and over and over and over again by 17 generals that were in charge of that war that told us things were going swimmingly. And eventually, if we just spent another $1 trillion and a couple more years there, when we left, things would be far better than when we entered. Only to watch the house of cards completely fall within a week once we decided to leave. The very people that were our allies, including American citizens, abandoned. Yes, I was for withdrawing from Afghanistan, but the way that it happened just showed the lack of concern, intelligence, and the absolute corruption of the people that prosecuted and lied to us for 20 years about how great things were going there. I feel bad for people in Syria that have to suffer through a proxy war, that the United States has said, well, we're there because we're there to fight ISIS. Yet we're also fighting Assad, who's fighting ISIS. And we've had people in the State Department admit that Al-Qaeda and al-Nusra are on our side in ISIS. So back home, we have to have the Patriot Act to take away people's Fourth Amendment rights because Islamic terrorism is so bad. But we have to be on the side of Islamic terrorism partially in Syria so that we can challenge Assad because Assad's so bad. And if we leave, our ally in NATO, Turkey, are genocidal maniacs that will kill our other allies, the Kurds. Yet even though we station nuclear weapons in Turkey, we now have to perpetually stay in Syria because if we leave, the Turks will kill the Kurds, and both of them are our allies. So I feel bad for all of those people involved as well. I feel bad for people in Africa that have gone through terrible war after terrible war. But what can I do? What can we do? What can my friends and family do? I need to sacrifice more? My friends and family that already are living paycheck to paycheck, they need to sacrifice more. That's who it's on? Or we don't care about people around the world? The very people that control these policies and create these disasters around the world constantly say that the real people that have to pay the price for it are the average people that had no control or no influence over that stuff in the first place. And yet they smugly act like they're morally superior. And the rest of us that say, I don't want to sacrifice for this anymore. I don't want to pay $15 a gallon for gas. I don't want that. They smugly point the finger at us and say, you're the problem. So people say now, if I don't drop everything, after 2 years of COVID, after those sacrifices, if I'm not willing to pay another $1 or $2 a gallon, if I'm not willing to pay $7 a gallon, well, that's immoral of me. I must be on Putin's side. Why don't you come to where I live and see what people are dealing with? I work block shifts. I got off work last Thursday. Gas was $3.85. This morning, the gas station that I drive by, gas was $4.29. 4 hours later, when I got off work, gas was $4.39. I stopped in for a drink at a gas station. Everyone in there was just morose. Everyone talking about, can you believe these prices? But it's not real to these people that have positions of power. It's not real to the person that's living with their mom. It's not real to the person that doesn't have kids to feed. It's not real to the person who's wealthy and doesn't give a shit anyways. It's not real to the military industrial people and the congressional people and the corrupt assholes that get us into these situations. They don't care. They'll be fine. Sure, they'll pay $15 a gallon. Whatever. When I can't feed my son, I'll take comfort in knowing, well, at least I virtue signaled to the great people of Ukraine and virtue signaled how terrible Putin is. The reality is, not only did they not give a shit about the people that actually have to make sacrifices, but that was part of the point in the first place. They want us to have our spirit broken. They don't like us. They want us to just go away, fly over country. As Rick Wilson called us, 10-toothed rubes, as Don Lemon smiled and clapped like a seal as they insulted these people over and over. We're deplorables. We cling to our guns and Bibles. Fuck those people. That's what the elites think. It's not that it's unfortunate that we're going to struggle to live because of their disastrous policies. The fact that we're suffering is part of the point. And although I, as a conservative and as a populist, have my feelings on just how terrible the Democrats and the Biden administration are, make no mistake about it, neocon, right-wing Republicans are just as bad. So excuse me if I'm not really concerned that all my social media has a little Ukrainian lapel and flag flying. Excuse me if I don't think that my number one concern should be what's going on in Ukraine today. I better get home and get my popcorn and see. I better make sure that everyone knows, oh, I don't buy products that still ship to Russia. Excuse me if I have other priorities like making sure that there's food on the table for my son and my wife. Excuse me of the people where I live that have been struggling for decades and were told that they had to sacrifice for 2 years. Excuse me if they have other things on their mind. And we have to suffer the indignity of the very people that are responsible for this shit pointing the finger again. Can you name me one policy that these people in positions of power ever suggest about the crisis they have? COVID or climate change or terrorism or Russia. Can you name me one policy that doesn't primarily come on the back of working class Americans? Every single policy they have is, well, the people that need to pay the most for this are the average person that's going to work 9 to 5. Maybe they have to work more. That's okay. It's their fault anyways. I'm sick and tired of being lied to by our intel agencies, our politicians. I don't like Putin. I have no love for him. But I see the propaganda. Life's not so simple as the picture they're painting. Zelensky's a hero. He's a knight in shining armor. He's done no wrong. NATO and the United States and Ukraine, noble people, noble leadership. Russia, the most evil regime of all time. The ghost of Kiev and Snake Island. Sunflowers being given to Russian soldiers. That doesn't mean I believe the opposite's true. Russia has a vested interest in spreading propaganda as well. I don't know what's going on the ground in Ukraine. I have no clue. But I know this. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me dozens and dozens of times. So I'm sorry if you're concerned that people like me and people in rural America aren't giving a shit about you being gung-ho for gas prices rising or boots on the ground or no-fly zones. And by the way, if it does come to a military conflict, polling shows that the wealthier you are, the more you're for it. Why? Because you won't be the one going over there to fight. It'll be the poor people and the working class again. And that's why they reject it. It's just, it's so bleak. It's so bleak watching what's about to come and knowing what's coming. And watching people that feel the helplessness. And not only do they feel like no one's there for them, but they feel like they're being targeted. And so many people accept it. They say, yeah, okay, you're right. Maybe I will lose my home, but you're right. We need to do this for Ukraine. Enough is enough. These aren't moral people. They're not better than you. They shouldn't shame you into thinking that you have to give a shit about them, about their war. They're not serious people. They're not people, they don't care about you, and they don't care about the people of Ukraine. It's all about power and corruption and enriching themselves and their own personal interest. So stop taking them seriously and focus on what's most important in your life. Your friends, your family, your community, and doing what you can to better them. And I'm sorry for the people less fortunate to me that live in these areas or any other area in this country that's about to go through great pain. As people smugly go, it's just another $1 a gallon. It's just $2 a gallon. It's just 7.9% inflation. But you could feel moral about it. At least there's no mean tweets. Stop pretending that you should take these people serious or that you need their appreciation or you need them to praise you. You don't.